In 1857, on the cotton plantations of Mississippi, a 10-year-old enslaved boy committed the unforgivable crime of stealing an egg to kill his hunger. The slave master, furious, dragged him into the forest to punish him away from prying eyes, a place where no one would hear the screams. What the master didn't know was that this forest had eyes, yellow eyes, and the owner of those eyes owed his life to the boy tied to the tree. When the whip tore through the air for the first time, the entire forest awakened. This is the story of Samuel, the boy who saved a wolf, and the day when cruelty met something that bows to no man. Mississippi in 1857 was a land where cotton was worth more than human blood. The plantations stretched for leagues, white as snow under the scorching sun, harvested by black hands that never rested. Among those hands was Samuel, 10 years old, thin as a twig, with sunken eyes that seemed to carry more hunger than hope. Samuel knew no freedom. He was born on the Thornhill plantation, property of Master Edward Thornhill, a man who measured his power by his ability to break wills. For Thornhill, slaves were investment. They needed to produce, obey, and above all, fear. Any deviation, however small, was reason for punishment, not for justice, but for principle. A stolen egg wasn't about the loss of the egg. It was about not allowing anyone to forget their place. Samuel's mother had died when he was 5 years old, exhausted in the cotton fields under an unforgiving sun. His father he never knew, sold to another plantation before the boy was even born. Samuel grew up among aunts who weren't blood relatives, cared for by calloused hands of women who did the impossible to keep the children alive, even when their own survival seemed impossible. Hunger was his oldest companion. Not the hunger of a missed meal, but the kind that lives in your stomach and corrodes from within day after day, year after year. The thin morning porridge barely lasted until midday. The hard piece of bread at night had to last until the next dawn. Samuel learned early not to complain. Complaining meant beatings, and beatings with hunger hurt twice as much. But there was one moment in the day when Samuel breathed differently. A task that others avoided, but for him was almost a blessing, fetching firewood at the edge of the forest. The overseers feared the dense woods that began where the plantation ended. They said there were rattlesnakes the size of a man's arm, panthers that hunted in silence, and spirits of runaway slaves who had died trying to cross the swamp. That's why they always sent the same boy. After all, if something happened to Samuel, it was just one less to feed. Samuel would carry his old burlap sack and walk alone down the narrow path that separated the world of men from the world of trees. There, away from the overseer's shouts and the crack of whips, he could pretend for a few minutes that he was free. He could look up and see the sky through the canopy, hear the song of birds that obeyed no one, smell the damp earth that knew no chains. The forest frightened the white men. For Samuel, it was the only place where he could breathe. Samuel would wake before the bell, not because he wanted to, but because hunger wouldn't let him sleep properly. His stomach would tighten, rumble, ache, an emptiness that seemed to suck everything from within. He would lie on the packed earth floor of the slave quarters, looking at the thatched ceiling, waiting for the inevitable call for another day. The bell would ring 3 times, chimes that cut through the still dark air of dawn. Samuel would rise along with the others, moving like a shadow among shadows. The women were already lighting the fire to prepare the porridge. The smaller children cried softly, from hunger or cold. No one could tell any more. Breakfast was always the same. Watery cornmeal porridge, without salt, without anything. 1 ladle per person. Samuel would drink slowly, trying to make it last, trying to fool his stomach. It didn't work. Half an hour later, the hunger returned as if he'd never eaten. In the fields, work began with first light. Samuel was too small for cotton picking, so they made him carry water, clean tools, pull weeds. Children's work, they said, as if children didn't tire, didn't sweat, didn't feel pain in their backs. But every day, around mid-morning, Overseer Sullivan would shout his name, "Samuel, firewood, go." It was a simple order, but it came with a secret relief. Samuel would grab the old sack and head for the trail, alone. That was the part that mattered. Alone meant no whip on his back, no eyes watching every movement, no having to lower his head when a white person passed. The trail began where the fields ended. On one side, endless rows of cotton. On the other, the dark green wall of the forest, a clear line dividing two worlds. Samuel would always pause for a second at this line, as if he needed courage to cross it. Then he'd take a deep breath and enter. The forest was another universe. Humid, shadowy, full of sounds Samuel couldn't identify. Branches cracked, leaves whispered, something was always moving in the bushes. The white men said there was danger there. Samuel knew the real danger was behind him, in the fields, in the big house, in the men with whips and chains. He would gather dry twigs, fallen branches, pieces of wood that would serve for the kitchen fire. He worked slowly, stretching out the time. Every minute there was a minute without hearing screams, without feeling the weight of fear. Sometimes Samuel would lean against a tree and close his eyes, just listening, the wind in the leaves, water running somewhere in the distance, birds singing without asking permission. There, for a few stolen moments, Samuel forgot he was someone's property. But hunger never forgot him. It was on a September afternoon that Samuel saw the eyes for the first time. The day was muggy, heavy, with that humid heat that sticks to your skin. Samuel had filled half the sack with firewood and was resting against an old oak tree, with thick roots that looked like fingers buried in the ground. He was looking at his own hands, small, injured, too calloused for 10 years, when he felt it. Someone was watching. It wasn't a feeling. It was certainty. That kind of knowledge that comes from somewhere deeper than thought. A primitive alarm that every living being carries within. Samuel froze. He didn't turn his head, didn't make a sound. He just let his eyes move slowly, searching. That's when he saw them. Between two dark trunks, about 20 paces away, a pair of yellow eyes glowed in the gloom. They weren't snake eyes nor wildcat eyes. They were large, round, fixed, and they were looking directly at him. Samuel's heart raced. He knew the stories: panthers, wolves, bears, things that killed people in seconds. He couldn't run, he knew that. Animals chase what runs, so he stayed still, praying softly without moving his lips, asking God that the creature wasn't hungry. Before we continue this shocking story, subscribe to the channel and comment "freedom," so I know who you are. Thank you, and let's keep going. Slowly the creature took a step forward. Samuel saw the muzzle first. Then the dark fur, matted, dirty with mud and dried blood. The animal was huge, bigger than any dog Samuel had ever seen. A wolf. A giant wolf, with a body too thin for the size of its frame, ribs showing, one front paw dragging slightly on the ground. The wolf was injured. And thin. As thin as Samuel. For long seconds, boy and animal measured each other in silence. Samuel breathed shallowly, trying not to make sudden movements. The wolf just watched, with those yellow eyes that seemed to see more than they should. There was no anger in that gaze, no hunger, just weariness, pain, loneliness. Samuel recognized it, because he felt the same. Then, slowly, the wolf turned and disappeared among the trees without making a sound, as if it had never been there. Samuel stood still for another 5 minutes, waiting for his heart to return to normal. When he finally managed to move, he grabbed the sack of firewood with trembling hands and ran back to the plantation. But throughout the return journey, and throughout the night, all he could see when he closed his eyes were those yellow eyes. And something inside him, something he didn't understand, knew he would see them again. Samuel didn't tell anyone about the wolf. He knew that if he did, the white men would come with guns and dogs. They would kill the animal for sport, turn its head into a trophy, and somehow that Samuel couldn't explain. That seemed wrong. But he couldn't stop thinking about the wolf, about that thinness, those wounds, that look. At night, when everyone slept, Samuel would lie awake thinking. The wolf was alone just like him. The wolf was injured just like him. The wolf was hungry just like him. The next morning, Samuel did something risky. During breakfast, when no one was looking, he hid a piece of his own bread inside his shirt. It was little, a handful of hard, old flour. But it was all he had. Saving food was forbidden. If they found out, he would be beaten. But Samuel saved it anyway. When it was time to fetch firewood, he went straight to the same place. The oak tree with thick roots. He stopped there, his heart beating hard, and waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Nothing. Samuel took a deep breath and did something that seemed crazy even to himself. He took the piece of bread from inside his shirt, placed it on the ground, clearly visible, and slowly backed away. Then he sat on a root about 10 paces away and stayed quiet. It took a long time. So long that Samuel thought he'd been foolish, that the wolf wouldn't come, that he'd wasted his piece of bread for nothing. He was almost giving up when he heard the soft sound of footsteps among the leaves. The wolf emerged from the woods, cautious, sniffing the air. It saw Samuel, stopped, kept watching. Samuel didn't move, didn't look directly in its eyes. He'd heard that was a challenge to animals. He just stayed quiet, breathing slowly. The wolf took another step, then another. It reached the bread, sniffed it, looked at Samuel one more time. Then, in a quick movement, it snatched the piece and backed away a few steps, chewing. It wasn't enough to kill the hunger of an animal that size, but Samuel saw gratitude in those yellow eyes. "You're alone, aren't you?" Samuel spoke softly, more to himself than to the wolf. "Just like me." The wolf didn't respond, of course, but it also didn't leave. It stayed there at a safe distance, just watching. And Samuel, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel completely alone in the world. The following days became routine. Samuel would save pieces of food, a chunk of bread, a potato peel, once even a piece of pork fat left over from the big house kitchen. He hid everything inside his shirt, risking the whip every time. When he went to fetch firewood, he would leave the food in the same place. The wolf always came, always ate, and gradually the distance between them decreased. Samuel began to talk to it, softly, scattered words he didn't say to anyone else. He talked about the hunger that never went away, about the mother he barely remembered, about the fear that lived lodged in his throat. The wolf would listen, lying among the roots with those yellow eyes fixed on the boy. It didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. It recognized another living being who also carried pain. The fear didn't disappear, but it became something else. It became respect. Samuel respected the wolf for being what it was, wild, free, bowing to no one. And the wolf somehow seemed to respect Samuel too. It was on an October afternoon that everything changed. Samuel had gone deeper into the forest that day, looking for drier branches. He was far from the usual oak when he heard it, a low, hoarse, pained sound. It wasn't a growl. It was a whimper. He followed the sound, his heart tightening. He passed through dense bushes, dodged roots that seemed to try to grab him until he reached a small clearing, and he saw. The wolf was lying on the ground, its hind leg trapped in an iron snare. One of those that white men set to catch foxes and coyotes. The metal teeth had bitten deep into the flesh. Blood stained the fur and the ground around it. The wolf was trying to free itself, pulling, whimpering, but each movement only made the trap bite deeper. When it saw Samuel, the wolf stopped struggling, the yellow eyes fixed on the boy, full of pain and something that seemed like pleading. Or maybe Samuel just wanted to believe that. He knew he should leave, should run back to the plantation, get the firewood, pretend he hadn't seen anything. A trapped wolf was the white men's problem, not his. If anyone found out he'd helped the creature, it would be considered sabotage. The punishment would be terrible. But Samuel looked into those eyes, saw the pain, saw the desperation, saw himself, trapped, bleeding, whimpering, waiting for someone who never came. "I'm going to free you," he said softly. "But you can't bite me, you hear? Please don't bite me." Samuel approached slowly on his knees, hands extended to show he had nothing. The wolf didn't growl. It just watched, body tense, breathing heavy. Samuel could smell the blood, could see the animal's muscles, ready to attack if necessary. But he continued. He reached the trap. It was old, rusty, but strong. The metal teeth were embedded in the wolf's paw, piercing fur and flesh. Samuel grabbed both edges of the trap and tried to open it. It didn't move. He pulled harder, using all his body weight. Nothing. The wolf whimpered, and Samuel felt tears burning in his eyes. "I know it hurts," he whispered. "I know, but I need to force it." He grabbed again, but this time placed his foot on the base of the trap for support. He pulled with everything he had. The muscles in his arms screamed. His hands slipped on the metal dirty with blood. The trap gave a creak, opened a finger's width, then another. Samuel shouted with effort. His hands bled where the iron cut. But he didn't let go. He pulled more, until finally the trap opened enough. The wolf pulled its paw in a desperate movement and was free. Samuel fell backward, his hands on fire, his chest rising and falling. The trap fell to the ground with a metallic thud. The wolf limped a few steps, its hind leg barely touching the ground, bleeding. Then it stopped, turned its head, and looked at Samuel. It was a long look, intense, as if it were engraving that moment, that face, that smell, as if it were marking a debt that had no words to say, but both understood. Then the wolf disappeared into the forest, limping but alive. Samuel sat there for a long time, looking at his own bleeding hands, at the fallen trap, at the trail of blood on the leaves. He knew he had done something important, something that changed something between him and that animal. There, in that moment, a silent debt was born. And debts, Samuel would learn soon, are always paid. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Samuel's life. The wolf disappeared for several days after the rescue. Samuel went to fetch firewood every day, always leaving food in the usual place. But the animal didn't appear. He began to fear the worst. That the wounds had been too severe, that the wolf had died in some hidden corner of the forest. But on a cold November morning, when Samuel arrived at the oak, the wolf was there. Not hidden among the trees, not at a safe distance. It was lying near the roots, waiting. The paw was still injured, but it could support it on the ground. The fur had been cleaned, probably licked, and the yellow eyes shone with a different intensity. Samuel stopped, not knowing what to do. The wolf raised its head, looked at him, and for the first time, there was no tension in the air. There was no fear. "You came back," Samuel whispered, a small smile appearing on his thin face. "I thought you had." He approached slowly and placed the food he'd brought on the ground. This time the wolf didn't wait. It came to the food while Samuel was still close, ate without backing away. Samuel sat leaning against the oak, at a respectful distance, and the two stayed there. That's how the most unlikely friendship in that Mississippi forest began. Samuel never tried to touch the wolf, never got too close, never made sudden movements. It wasn't a domesticated dog, wasn't a pet. It was a wolf, wild, dangerous, free. And Samuel respected that. He respected it because he understood. He also wasn't what the white men wanted him to be. He also had something inside that didn't bow completely, even when his body was forced to obey. But they met. Every day. Samuel would bring food when he could, stolen leftovers, pieces saved from his own hunger. The wolf was always there, waiting. And Samuel would talk. He talked about everything, about the constant fear, about the pain in his back after a whole day bent in the field, about the humiliation of having to lower his head when any white person passed, even white children younger than him, about the longing for a mother whose face he barely remembered, about the dreams he sometimes had, where he could run and never stop, and no one came after him. The wolf listened. It would lie with its head on its paws, eyes fixed on Samuel, ears attentive to every word. It didn't understand Portuguese, but it understood pain. It understood loneliness. It understood what it was like to be hunted just for existing. They were two outcasts, a boy no one saw as human, an animal that men killed for fun. And there, in that forgotten piece of forest, they were equals. Samuel knew the danger. If the white men found out, they would kill the wolf without hesitation, and probably punish Samuel for communion with a wild creature or whatever other excuse they invented. So he was careful. Never stayed too long in the forest. Never talked about the wolf with anyone. He kept that secret like he kept pieces of food, hidden, protected, precious. Sometimes on moonless nights, Samuel would look through the crack in the slave quarters toward the forest and imagine the wolf there, free among the trees. And for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine that he was free too. That he could walk without chains, without fear, without having to ask permission to breathe. The friendship with the wolf was the only thing in Samuel's life that belonged only to him. The only choice he had made of his own free will. The only relationship where he wasn't property or slave. He was a friend. And that, Samuel would discover soon, was worth more than either of them imagined. Winter arrived with even tighter hunger. Rations decreased. Master Thornhill said it was because of market prices, but everyone knew it was just greed. The porridge became thinner, the bread older. Children cried more during the night, and adults became quieter during the day. Samuel was desperate. The food he managed to save for the wolf was costing his own survival. But every time he thought about stopping, he remembered those yellow eyes, that paw trapped in the snare, the moment when he had done something that mattered. So he continued sharing, continued starving to feed his only friend. It was on a cold December morning that it happened. Samuel was passing near the chicken coop, an improvised construction near the big house kitchen, when he saw it. The door was ajar. Someone had forgotten to lock it after getting eggs for the master's breakfast. He stopped, looked around. No one nearby. The overseers were in the fields. The cook was inside the house. It was just a second. Just one chance. Samuel's stomach hurt like never before. It had been 3 days since he'd barely eaten, saving almost everything for the wolf. Dizziness came and went. At night he dreamed of food. He woke up with the taste of nothing in his mouth. One egg. Just one. No one would notice. There were so many in there. Samuel knew it was a lie. He knew that on the Thornhill plantation everything was counted, measured, controlled. Eggs were counted every morning and every night. 1 egg less would be noticed. But hunger was stronger than fear. Or maybe hunger and fear had merged into one thing that pushed Samuel inside that chicken coop. He entered quickly. The chickens clucked, nervous. In the corner, 3 fresh eggs still warm. Samuel grabbed one, the smallest, as if that made a difference. He hid it inside his shirt against his skin, where the warmth of the egg mixed with the warmth of his own body. He left quickly, closed the door, looked around again. No one had seen. Or so he thought. Samuel waited until it was time to fetch firewood to eat the egg. He went to the oak where the wolf was already waiting, and there, with trembling hands from fear and anticipation, he broke the shell. The yolk ran through his fingers. He ate slowly, savoring every drop, feeling the food go down his throat, calming a bit that endless hunger. He shared with the wolf, half for each. The animal licked his fingers, something it had never done before, and Samuel laughed, a strange sound that he'd almost forgotten how to make. For a few hours he was happy. For a few hours he forgot the world, but the world doesn't forget. When Samuel returned to the plantation that afternoon, there was unusual commotion. The overseers were gathered near the chicken coop. The cook, a fat white woman with a red face, was shouting about thieving Negroes. Master Thornhill was there too, arms crossed, face hard. Samuel felt his blood freeze. "Line everyone up!" Master Thornhill shouted. "Now!" The overseers went from quarters to quarters, dragging everyone out. Children, old people, pregnant women, everyone. They formed a line in the packed earth courtyard. Samuel placed himself along with the others, trying to control the trembling in his legs. Master Thornhill walked along the line, his boots making noise on the ground. He stopped in front of each person, looking in their eyes, searching for guilt. "One egg," he said, his voice cutting. "Someone stole an egg from my chicken coop." Silence. "It's not about the egg," he continued. "It's about respect. It's about knowing one's place. It's about understanding that here on this plantation I am the law, and whoever breaks my law pays." He stopped in front of Samuel. The boy tried to hold his gaze but couldn't. He lowered his eyes. And in that moment, in that fraction of a second, Master Thornhill knew. "You," he said low, "look at me, boy." Samuel slowly raised his eyes. He saw the anger on the master's face. He also saw something worse, pleasure in having found an excuse. "It was you, wasn't it?" Samuel could lie, could deny, but lies cost dearly when discovered. And on his face, everyone already knew the truth. "Master, I was hungry, The slap came so fast Samuel didn't even see it. He only felt the explosion of pain in his cheek, the taste of blood in his mouth, the ground approaching. He fell sideways, vision darkening for a second. "Get up!" Master Thornhill shouted. Samuel stood up, legs shaky. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. "Tomorrow morning," Master Thornhill said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this boy is going to learn what happens to thieves, and you all are going to learn along with him." He looked around at all the frightened faces. "No one steals from me. Never." Edward Thornhill wasn't the worst slave master in Mississippi, but he was also far from being one of the best. He didn't whip for sadistic pleasure, like some Samuel had heard about. Didn't brand with iron. Didn't separate mothers from babies just out of cruelty. But Thornhill had vanity, and his vanity fed on control. He had inherited the plantation from his father, along with the debts and the reputation of being soft with the Negroes. In the first years, he had tried to be different, reasonable even. But the neighbors laughed. They said he would lose everything if he didn't show a firm hand. They said slaves only respected fear. So Thornhill learned to turn punishment into theater. It wasn't about the crime. It was about the performance. About ensuring each punishment was engraved in everyone's memory, so no one dared to repeat it. A stolen egg was the perfect opportunity. That night, Samuel didn't sleep. He lay on the floor of the slave quarters, hearing others whisper worriedly. Some women cried softly. Aunt Ruth, who always had words of comfort, came to him and held his thin hand. "It's going to hurt," she said softly, "but you'll endure. Bite your tongue. Don't scream. Don't give him the satisfaction." Samuel nodded. but inside he was empty. It wasn't the fear of pain that hurt most. It was the injustice. It was knowing that a lifetime of hunger, of work, of obedience meant nothing. A single egg, an egg he didn't even have time to savor properly, and everything ended in blood. The bell rang before sunrise. Everyone was awakened. Public punishments always happened early before work began. They served as a reminder for the entire day. But this time was different. "It won't be here," Overseer Sullivan announced. "The master wants to do it in the woods. Bring the boy." Confusion among the enslaved. Punishments were always in the courtyard, where everyone watched. Never in the forest. Why in the forest? Aunt Ruth squeezed Samuel's hand. "Maybe it's better," she whispered. "At least the children won't see." But Samuel knew it wasn't out of kindness. It was for something else. He just didn't know what yet. Master Thornhill appeared mounted on his horse, a large, well-kept bay. He carried the whip in his right hand, not the overseer's common whip, but his special whip, of braided leather with metal tips. "Let's go," he said. Two overseers grabbed Samuel by the arms and pushed him forward. He walked on trembling legs, barefoot on the cold ground, toward the trail he knew so well. The trail that led to the forest, to his place of escape, to the place where his only friend lived. And suddenly Samuel understood. It wasn't about sparing the children from seeing, it was about taking him away. To where no one would hear the screams. To where no one could intervene, even if they wanted to. The forest that had been his refuge would now be his place of torment. They walked for 15 minutes. They passed the area where Samuel usually fetched firewood. They passed the oak. Samuel looked at the thick roots where the wolf used to lie, but there was nothing there, just leaves and shadow. Finally, Master Thornhill stopped in a small clearing. The sunlight hadn't reached there completely yet. Everything was gloom and cold. "This will do," he said, dismounting from the horse. The overseers dragged Samuel to a thick tree. They forced his arms around the trunk and tied his wrists on the other side with rough rope. Samuel was facing the trunk, back exposed, feet barely touching the ground. "Take off the shirt," Thornhill ordered. One of the overseers tore Samuel's old shirt, exposing his thin back where the ribs were visible under the dark skin. Thornhill held the whip, testing its weight. The leather cracked in the air once, just to intimidate. Samuel closed his eyes tightly. 20 lashes, Thornhill announced. "So you learn that nothing here is yours. Not an egg, not a piece of bread, not the air you breathe. Everything is mine. You are mine." He raised his arm. And that's when the forest awakened. The wolf was hunting when it felt it. It wasn't sound. It wasn't scent yet. It was something deeper. That instinct that has no name, that connects predators to the world around them. Danger. Fear. Familiar. It stopped mid-movement, a half-eaten ear forgotten between its paws. It raised its head, muzzle testing the air. And then it caught it. The boy's scent. But it wasn't the normal scent. That of sweat, earth, and the old bread he always brought. It was the scent of fear. Pure fear, sharp, desperate. The kind of fear that precedes pain or death. The wolf knew that scent. It had felt it before, when it was trapped in the snare, when the metal teeth bit into its flesh and it thought it would die there. And it had felt the opposite, the absence of fear when the boy came, when small, trembling hands freed it even at great risk. Debts don't need words. They're engraved somewhere older than language. The wolf began to run, not from hunting instinct, not from hunger, but from something wolves understand better than humans, loyalty. The boy had saved its life when he could have fled. The boy had shared food when he himself was starving. The boy had spoken to it as an equal, not as an inferior creature. And now, The boy was in danger. The wolf crossed the forest like a shadow. Body still thin but strong, the paw that had been injured now healed enough to run. It jumped over roots, dodged bushes, following that scent of fear that grew stronger with each second. It reached the edge of a clearing and stopped. There was the boy, tied to a tree, back naked and exposed, and behind him a man. Smell of horse, leather, anger, and that specific type of cruelty the wolf recognized. The man held a long thing that ended in tips that gleamed in the dim light. The wolf had seen men like this before. Men who killed not from necessity, but for pleasure. Men who hurt for fun. 2 other men were there too, smelling of sweat and lesser fear. Not the fear of suffering, but the fear of those who watch and do nothing. The man with the gleaming thing raised his arm, and the wolf decided. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct deeper than thought. It was honor. Yes, animals have honor, even if humans sometimes forget this. It was debt being paid. The wolf left the protection of the trees. The first to see it was Overseer Sullivan. He was leaning against a tree on the other side of the clearing, waiting for the spectacle to begin, when something in the corner of his vision made him turn his head. What he saw made him freeze. A huge shadow was emerging from the forest. No, it wasn't a shadow. It was a wolf. The biggest wolf Sullivan had ever seen in his life. The size of a calf, with dark fur stained with grey, muscles moving under the skin, and eyes. God, those yellow eyes glowing with an intensity that made Sullivan forget how to breathe. "Master," he stammered. Thornhill had his back turned, concentrated on positioning the whip correctly for the first blow. "Shut up, Sullivan, The growl cut his words like a knife. It wasn't a common growl. It was a sound that came from somewhere primitive, prior to civilization, prior to fences and plantations and chains. It was a sound that reminded all the men there that they were, in the end, just meat. Thornhill turned slowly. He saw the wolf. The whip dropped slightly in his hand. "Good Lord," he whispered. The wolf didn't run, didn't attack blindly. It advanced slowly, deliberate, eyes fixed on Thornhill. Each step was a message. Get out of the way or become food. "Shoot!" Thornhill shouted, recovering his voice. "Kill that creature!" Overseer Sullivan pulled the revolver from its holster with trembling hands. He aimed. The shot echoed through the forest, sending birds flying in panic. The bullet passed too close to the wolf, tearing bark from a tree behind it. The wolf didn't even blink. Sullivan shot again, missed again. His hands trembled too much. The fear was too great. That's when the wolf decided it had waited long enough. It charged. Sullivan dropped the gun and ran. The other overseer tried to raise his rifle, but the wolf was faster. It hit the man with all its body weight, knocking him down like a doll. The rifle flew far. The overseer screamed, tried to roll, but the wolf placed its paws on his chest, growling so close to his face that spit and hot breath mixed. The man fainted, simply passed out from so much fear. Thornhill was trying to mount the horse, but the animal was in panic. It neighed, kicked, backed away. The wolf turned toward him, and Thornhill did the only thing he could, ran backward, stumbled over a root, fell on his back in the dirt. The wolf advanced. It stopped centimeters from the fallen body, teeth showing, a low, continuous growl vibrating in its throat. Thornhill raised his arms to protect his face, the whip fallen beside him, useless. Don't kill me," he begged. "Please." The wolf could kill. Easily. One bite to the throat and it would all be over. But it didn't kill. Instead, it turned and walked straight to the tree where Samuel was still tied. Samuel had heard everything but hadn't seen. Tied facing the trunk, he could only hear the shots, the screams, the growl that made his blood freeze and warm at the same time. Now he heard footsteps. Not a man's footsteps. Footsteps of something large, heavy, coming straight toward him. The wolf stopped beside Samuel. It smelled the air, smelled the boy, checking if he was hurt. Then it did something that made Samuel's heart almost explode. The wolf lay down between Samuel and the white men. It placed its body as a shield, as a wall, as a promise. No one touched the boy without going over it first. "You came," Samuel whispered. His voice choked. You came to save me." The wolf turned its head, yellow eyes meeting brown ones, and in that look there was a clear answer. Always. Because debts are paid. Always. It took 5 minutes for Thornhill to recover enough courage to move. He crawled away, slowly, without taking his eyes off the wolf. He managed to mount the horse, still trembling. He looked at Samuel, at the wolf, at that entire impossible scene. "This doesn't end here," he said, his voice trembling. "I'll come back, with men, with dogs, and I'll kill that creature." The wolf growled one last time. Thornhill spurred the horse and fled into the forest, the overseers stumbling after him. When the sound of hooves disappeared, the wolf stood up. It went to the ropes that held Samuel. With its teeth, it began to gnaw. It took time, but finally the rope gave way. Samuel fell to his knees, legs without strength. He turned and for the first time was face to face with the wolf, without a tree between them. The animal was even bigger up close, frightening, magnificent. "Thank you," Samuel said, tears finally falling. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The wolf approached, and for the first time it touched its muzzle to the boy's forehead. A brief touch, gentle, that said more than any word could. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest. Samuel stayed there, alone in the clearing, while the sun finally broke through the trees, free, alive, and knowing he had a friend who would cross any line to protect him. Samuel didn't return to the plantation that day. He knew it would be madness. Thornhill would return with guns, dogs, men. They would kill the wolf, and probably kill Samuel too for witchcraft or whatever other accusation they invented. So he ran, deeper into the forest, to places he'd never been. The wolf appeared a few times, always at a distance, guiding, showing paths, as if it knew that now was time to hide. That night, Samuel slept curled up in a cavity between enormous roots of an ancient oak. He was cold, hungry, afraid, but he also had something new: hope. The forest wasn't a prison. It was freedom, if he learned its rules. In the morning, he woke to distant noise, barking, shouts, Thornhill's hunting dogs tracking his scent. Samuel stood up, ready to run further. But the wolf appeared in front of him. It looked at Samuel, then at the direction of the barking, and it turned, going straight toward the sound. "No!" Samuel shouted softly. "They'll kill you!" The wolf looked back one last time. There was determination in those yellow eyes. There was goodbye. Then it disappeared among the trees. The barking got louder. Then came shouts, shots, confusion. Samuel heard everything from afar, hands covering his ears, praying, pleading. It took a long time, hours perhaps, or minutes that seemed like eternity. When silence finally came, Samuel waited. Waited for the next morning, for the day after, for the entire week. The wolf never returned. Samuel finally left the forest on a foggy morning. He didn't return to the Thornhill plantation. Instead, he followed the road, limping, starving, until he reached a small town where secret abolitionists hid him. It took months, but eventually they managed to send him north, to freedom. But Samuel never forgot. Years later, when the Civil War broke out and he joined the Union Army, he would tell the story to the other black soldiers. The story of the wolf that saved him, of the friend who crossed the line between wilderness and civilization out of a loyalty. Many didn't believe. They said it was delirium, trauma, myth. But those who had been enslaved understood. They understood that sometimes, amid the greatest cruelty humans can create, impossible alliances emerge. Friendships that transcend species, color, chain. The story spread. It returned to Mississippi, passed from mouth to mouth among the enslaved. It changed, grew, gained colors. Some said the wolf was an ancestor's spirit. Others, that it was a disguised angel. Still others, that it was simply a wolf, and that was already miracle enough. On the Thornhill plantation, Edward never again whipped anyone in the forest. He was afraid. The enslaved noticed this fear and kept it in their hearts as a small victory. For the first time, the master had something besides them to fear. And on moonless nights, when the cold wind blew from the woods, sometimes a long, lonely howl could be heard. Children would ask what it was, and the older ones would answer, with a small smile at the corner of their mouths, "It's the slave boy's wolf, still guarding the forest, still reminding us all that even in the greatest darkness, even in the greatest suffering, there's something that doesn't bow. There's friendship that neither whip nor chain can break. There's dignity that no master can take away. And one day," they would say, looking at the stars, "one day we'll be free like that wolf. And when we are, we'll remember everyone who helped us get there, even those who had 4 legs and yellow eyes." The story of the wolf and the boy became legend, became a whispered song, became hope when there was no other. And in each version, one truth remained. The egg was just the trigger. What really frightened Mississippi was discovering that even an enslaved child, considered less than human, could have an ally that obeyed no master, could have dignity, could have a friend, could have someone willing to cross any line to protect them. And that, more than any revolt or escape, was the most dangerous thing for a system built on the lie that some humans are worth less than others. Because if a hungry boy could have a friend in the forest, if a wolf could see humanity where masters saw only property, then the entire structure of slavery was a lie. And lies, however powerful, always fall when confronted with simple truth. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves kindness. Everyone deserves to have someone who will cross any line to protect them. Even a slave boy, even a wounded wolf, even all of us.